October 8, 1918, Meuse-Argonne, France. The morning fog clung to the shattered Argonne Forest like a veil, hiding the horrors yet to come. The ground was soaked from weeks of rain, and the scent of wet leaves mingled with the acrid tang of cordite from distant artillery. The men of Company G, 328th Infantry Regiment, moved cautiously through the mud, rifles low, hearts pounding. They had been told this would be a routine advance, but experience in war teaches a different lesson. Quiet forests often conceal deadly traps. Among the soldiers walked Corporal Alvin Cullum York, a 30-year-old Tennessee farmer. His uniform was caked in mud, but his movements were calm and deliberate. Over his shoulder rested his Springfield M1911 rifle, and at his side, the reliable Colt M1911 pistol, polished the night before despite the chaos around him. York had always been a man of faith, and even now, the prayers he whispered under his breath steadied him more than any weapon could. The objective for the day was clear: advance north through the Argonne, seize the high ground near the Decauville Railroad, and break the German line. Intelligence suggested light opposition, but the men had learned that when the forest held its breath, danger was often near. That evening, before the advance, York had scribbled in his small diary, "We pray. We have orders to go forward. I am not afraid, but my heart is heavy." At 600 hours, the shrill sound of whistles echoed through the fog. The men surged forward, careful, tense, every footstep sinking into the mud. German artillery responded almost immediately. Shells burst among the trees, throwing up shards of wood and earth. York was knocked to the ground by one near miss, ears ringing, and rose again, adjusting the sling of his rifle. By mid-morning, the unit had fractured. Trees blocked sight lines, fog made signals impossible, and German machine guns began to chatter from hidden positions. The patrol found itself pinned in a ravine, isolated and under fire from 3 directions. Orders came from Captain Danforth. A 17-man patrol was to flank the Germans, silencing their guns before they could destroy the main company. York, although only a corporal, joined the team. Every step toward the ridge was treacherous: mud, broken branches, and the constant whine of bullets. The forest seemed alive, whispering danger from every shadow. At 0900 hours, voices in German floated through the fog. The patrol froze. Ahead, in a small clearing, lay a line of machine gun nests, firing downhill toward their comrades. Sergeant Early, the patrol leader, raised his hand. Forward. Then came the first volley, sudden, deafening, and devastating. The ambush was perfect. Bullets tore through the underbrush. Private Weigel fell first, screaming, then Sergeant Savage. Panic rippled among the men. The Americans dove for cover wherever they could, behind fallen logs, tree stumps, and crumpled earth. York hit the mud, heart hammering, adrenaline sharpening his senses. Sergeant Early shouted over the chaos, "York, take charge! We've got to get those guns!" 8 men were down, their patrol scattered. Only one choice remained. Someone had to strike uphill against the machine guns, or all would die. York looked at his rifle, then his Colt M1911 at his side. He whispered a prayer, then began moving forward, low and deliberate, crawling from cover to cover. Every step was a battle against the mud, the trees, and the storm of bullets. When he finally crested a small rise, he saw them clearly. 5 German gunners, firing with lethal precision. York steadied his rifle, aimed carefully, and fired. One by one, the gunners fell. The forest echoed with the cracks of his shots and the shouts of the enemy. A bullet hissed past his ear. York ducked behind a tree, reloaded, and fired again. 6 German soldiers lay dead, The others scattered in confusion. The rifle's last rounds spent, York drew his Colt M1911. 5 soldiers charged him, bayonets glinting. Calmly, he fired, dropping each one in succession. The forest fell silent again, except for the faint click of his pistol's slide. Below, more Germans shouted and advanced. York crouched, counted his remaining bullets, 5, and prepared. He fired again, stopping a squad in its tracks. Then, calling in broken German, "Komm hierher! Hands up!" One by one, the enemy surrendered. By noon, York had killed at least 20 Germans, silenced 35 machine guns, and forced 132 to surrender, all alone. His patrol emerged from the trees in disbelief. Private Donahue muttered, "Good Lord, York. How'd you do that?" York simply replied, "It was them or us. I just kept shooting till they quit." The forest was quiet now, but the silence was deceptive. Smoke from shell craters curled into the misty morning air, and the fallen leaves were spattered with mud and blood. York's men gathered around him, exhausted and shaking. The 132 German prisoners lined up under the trees, hands high, bewildered by the surreal scene. York remained crouched, Colt M1911 in hand, scanning the tree line for any threat. He was no longer just a corporal. He was the anchor for his patrol, the man who had carried them through impossible odds. His breaths came in shallow rhythm, his heart pounding, but his mind was remarkably clear. Every decision, every movement had been deliberate, precise, almost surgical. The survivors of his patrol had seen men fall around them, had watched bullets zip through the fog, and yet York had remained unflinching. "It was God's work," he would later tell reporters. "I was just following through." The prisoners were herded toward the American lines under the cautious guidance of York's remaining men. Along the way, one German officer, frantic and desperate, tried to break free. York raised his Colt, the barrel gleaming in the dappled light. One shot to the ground at the officer's feet, and the man froze, hands in the air. No one else moved. The march back to the battalion command post was tense. York led the prisoners, constantly alert, Colt ready at his side. The Americans who survived looked at him in awe, whispering about the man who had taken on an entire German machine gun line alone. Some thought it was luck. Others sensed something more, a combination of courage, skill, and perhaps divine providence. When they reached the command post around midday, Colonel Buxton came out to see what had transpired. His eyes widened at the sight. 132 surrendered enemy soldiers, disarmed, and a handful of exhausted Americans who had survived the ambush. "You mean to tell me you captured all these men?" the colonel asked, incredulous. York, breathing heavily from the exertion, simply nodded. "Yes, sir. With God's help, I reckon." After reporting the event, York and his men were given a brief respite. They sat on overturned crates and muddy logs, eating cold rations and trying to make sense of what had happened. Around them, the forest was still littered with wreckage, splintered machine guns, empty shell casings, and the fallen soldiers who hadn't survived the assault. As reporters later recounted, the hills seemed haunted by the echoes of that morning, the sounds of bullets, the screams, the desperate shouts of men charging or falling. Yet in the midst of the chaos, York's presence had been steady. Every decision had been purposeful, every shot precise. By the time the dust settled, he had not only turned the tide of the skirmish, but had become a legend before the rest of the division even knew his name. Word of York's actions travelled quickly. By evening, officers rode out to confirm the details of the engagement. They found the hillside still littered with the remnants of German defences, smashed machine guns, spent ammunition, and the bodies of those who had fallen. Witnesses verified what York had done. He had killed approximately 20 enemy soldiers, silenced 35 machine guns, and captured 132 prisoners single-handedly. York was promoted to sergeant immediately. The soldiers who survived the ambush treated him like a ghost walking the battlefield, a figure seemingly untouchable, moving through gunfire with calm precision. Some whispered that he was protected by Providence. Others simply nodded and called him a hero, though York himself remained humble, attributing his survival and success to prayer and duty rather than personal skill alone. By nightfall, the patrol had returned to the trenches, and the prisoners were secured. York sat quietly, Colt resting on his lap, replaying the events in his mind. Each movement, each shot, each order seemed to linger in memory, as if etched into the very mud and trees around him. The adrenaline faded slowly, replaced by exhaustion and the heavy weight of what had transpired. While the rest of the division slept, York remained alert. The forest, silent now, seemed to hum with memory. The echoes of gunfire, the cries of men, the whisper of leaves over bodies. He had survived against impossible odds, but the cost was clear. Dozens of his comrades lay dead or wounded, and the forest itself bore the scars of human conflict. The next morning, October 9th, 1918, York's actions began to be formally documented. Witnesses from both sides recounted the events with a mixture of disbelief and reverence. The Germans could hardly believe that a single man had overpowered so many and forced a surrender of such magnitude. Officers noted that York had moved with the calm of a seasoned tactician, but with the courage and determination of a man facing insurmountable odds. Reports highlighted his use of both rifle and Colt M1911, describing the meticulous precision and bravery displayed under constant fire. Word spread through the division. This was no ordinary soldier. He was a figure who would inspire legends, a man whose courage would be taught for generations as the embodiment of skill, faith, and valor on the battlefield. The morning of October 9th, 1918, dawned grey and heavy over the Argonne. The forest was eerily still, the silence broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves or distant artillery. For most soldiers, the horrors of the previous day would linger in nightmares, but for York, it was a moment that would define his life. The hill he had seized, the Germans he had stopped, and the machine guns he had silenced were etched into memory like scars on the earth. By this time, news of York's actions had spread through the 328th Infantry and beyond. Officers arrived to verify the astonishing claims. Witnesses recounted the details. A single man had advanced under fire, killing approximately 20 enemy combatants, neutralizing dozens of machine guns, and forcing 132 Germans to surrender. Some described his calm under fire, his precision, and his use of both rifle and Colt M1911 as miraculous. Soldiers whispered that he had moved like a shadow through the chaos, untouchable, almost supernaturally protected. York's patrol gathered the surrendered Germans and led them back to the American lines. The prisoners were bewildered and scared, their discipline broken by a single soldier who had faced them with courage and skill. York's Colt M1911, once a tool of defense, had become a symbol of authority and survival. One officer later remarked that the pistol was as mighty in his hands as the entire patrol combined. Along the march back, York remained vigilant. His calm demeanor inspired his remaining men, who were still shaking from the previous day's carnage. "It's just another day," he muttered, though every step weighed on him with the gravity of responsibility. He understood that the lives of his comrades and the success of the mission had rested on his decisions. Colonel Buxton met them at the command post, eyes wide with disbelief at the line of prisoners. "You mean to tell me that one man captured all these soldiers?" he asked. York's only reply was a quiet nod. "With God's help, I reckon," he said. his faith as unshakable as his aim. Reports of York's actions began to circulate among the 82nd Division. Soldiers retold the story in hushed, awed tones, emphasizing the almost supernatural calm he maintained under fire. Officers documented every detail meticulously, noting not only the numbers captured and weapons neutralized, but the manner in which York had executed the action, deliberate, methodical, and unwavering in courage. The battlefield itself bore witness. Spent shell casings, empty machine gun nests, and fallen soldiers littered the forest floor. Yet through the wreckage, the heroism of one man stood in stark contrast to the chaos. By October 10th, official reports recognized that York's actions had prevented potential disaster for the 328th Infantry, saved countless lives, and demonstrated extraordinary bravery. Later that evening, as York rested among his men, he reflected on what had transpired. The adrenaline of combat had faded, replaced by exhaustion and the weight of responsibility. He had witnessed death, destruction, and chaos unlike anything he had ever imagined. And yet, through it all, he had remained focused, calm, and faithful. His Colt M1911 had served not merely as a weapon, but as a lifeline, a tool that allowed him to protect his men and achieve the impossible. York's humility prevented him from fully grasping the enormity of his deeds. To him, it had been a matter of duty and survival. To history, it was the birth of a legend. By nightfall, soldiers, officers, and journalists alike were repeating the story. The man who had silenced machine guns, killed dozens, and captured 132 prisoners alone. A soldier from Tennessee had done what seemed impossible. The legend would grow, spreading beyond the battlefield. News correspondents described York's courage in newspapers and dispatches, painting a picture of a man whose skill, faith, and calm under fire were unparalleled. The Colt M1911 became inseparably linked with his actions, a tool that symbolized precision, reliability, and the will to survive. It was not just a pistol, it was an extension of his determination, a companion in the chaos of battle. By the end of October 10th, York was formally promoted to sergeant, an acknowledgement of leadership earned not by rank, but by action. The promotion carried weight far beyond the title. It recognized the courage and composure required to act decisively under extreme conditions. For the men of the 328th, Sergeant York was more than a comrade. He was a living testament to the power of focus, bravery, and faith in the most desperate circumstances. By the evening of October 10th, 1918, the forest had fallen silent. The thunder of battle had faded, leaving only the groans of the wounded and the murmur of exhausted soldiers. York sat quietly, Colt M1911 resting on his lap, mud caking his uniform, eyes fixed on the smouldering remains of what had been a fiercely defended German position. The weight of the day's events pressed on him, not pride, not triumph, but a solemn understanding of life and death, and the responsibility he bore for those around him. Even as the survivors of his patrol ate cold rations, the story of York's stand began to ripple through the 328th Infantry and beyond. Soldiers described how he had advanced under withering fire, neutralized multiple machine guns, and forced 132 enemy combatants to surrender. The sheer scale of his actions stunned everyone who heard the account. Some whispered that no man could have done what he had done without divine protection. Others simply marveled at the courage, skill, and precision he displayed under the most harrowing circumstances. The German prisoners, once emboldened by the strength of their defences, now walked silently in lines, disarmed and bewildered. York had led them personally to the American command post, maintaining vigilance at every step. His Colt M1911, a seemingly ordinary sidearm, had become an instrument of survival and authority, a tool that turned the tide of an engagement that might otherwise have ended in disaster. Officers noted the calmness with which York handled the situation, remarking that the man had acted with the precision of a seasoned tactician, the courage of a soldier who refused to yield, and the composure of someone profoundly grounded in faith. As word of his actions reached division headquarters, recognition followed swiftly. York was promoted to sergeant, not simply for surviving the engagement, but for the decisive leadership and bravery that had saved countless lives. Reports emphasized the tactical significance of his assault, neutralizing multiple machine gun nests and forcing the surrender of an entire enemy squad with a single man, wielding both rifle and Colt M1911. By October 11th, official accounts of the engagement had reached Washington. York's story, already legendary among the soldiers of the 82nd Division, now became a symbol of American courage and ingenuity on the battlefield. Journalists chronicled the event with awe, noting the improbable circumstances under which one man had altered the course of a skirmish. Letters sent home described a soldier from rural Tennessee whose calm resolve and lethal precision had become a beacon of hope and heroism. The Colt M1911, in York's hands, was celebrated not only as a weapon, but as a symbol of reliability, courage, and ingenuity. Soldiers and historians alike would recount how this standard-issue sidearm, when wielded with skill and determination, could turn the tide of battle. For York, however, the act was simple. He had done what was necessary, relying on training, faith, and instinct. The battlefield itself bore witness to the extraordinary event. Scorched earth, shattered trees, and spent shell casings testified to the chaos of war. But amidst the destruction stood the figure of one man who had shaped history. York's precision, patience, and courage were remembered not for the destruction he wrought, but for the lives he saved. Each step of his advance, each shot fired, had been deliberate, a careful orchestration of survival, skill, and faith under conditions that would have shattered any ordinary soldier. In the months that followed, York received the Medal of Honor, the United States military's highest recognition for valor. Ceremonies and commendations acknowledged his courage, but his humility remained intact. York repeatedly attributed his actions to divine guidance, refusing to claim glory for himself. His story inspired countless soldiers, demonstrating that ordinary men, under extraordinary circumstances, could perform feats of incredible courage. Even decades later, the name Alvin York resonates as a symbol of bravery. The battle at the Argonne Forest is remembered not merely for strategic outcomes, but for the story of a soldier who, armed with faith, skill, and a Colt M1911, stood against overwhelming odds and emerged victorious. His actions on October 8, 1918, became a timeless lesson in courage, leadership, and perseverance under fire. In classrooms, documentaries, and historical texts, York's heroism continues to inspire. The forest may have healed, and the scars of battle faded, but the legend of a single man standing against an entire machine gun line remains vivid. A humble farmhand from Tennessee had faced death, held his ground, and rewritten what was possible for one soldier. By the time the sun set over the Argonne Forest that October evening, history had been written not in headlines or reports alone, but in the actions of Sergeant Alvin York, whose courage, precision, and faith would echo through generations, forever linked to the trusted Colt M1911 that had helped him turn the tide of one of World War I's most remarkable engagements.